Welcome to the Conservation Is podcast, a Conservation Chat UK production. This is the place where we start the conversation about all things conservation and share them with our listeners. You can join in and interact with us using the hashtag ConservationIs and the hashtag ConservationChatUK. Let's start the conversation. Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Conservation Is podcast. You're catching us today in our glorious garden because we're currently on lockdown and we're making the most of the sunshine, so we thought we'd bring you a podcast outside. So today it's me, Laura, and Stuart as usual.
Hello.
But we've also got Steph with us. So Steph, can you just quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Steph and I work as an ecologist, so mostly doing field surveys, including lots of bats, reptiles, dormice, generally just a lot of British species.
Cool. So the perfect person to be sat here and chatting about persecuted species with us today. So as conservationists and ecologists, we spend a lot of time kind of studying the persecution of species, because that's quite often the reason why conservation has to be done, basically. So we've got a few species in mind, so I just want to kick it off because we're on the English Riviera, we're in Devon, and one of our biggest species here that is persecuted is the herring gull. So what's everyone's opinion on herring gulls? What have we got to say about this?
I think they're misunderstood. I think when you look at them as a species, they're amazing at adapting, and that's part of the problem. Because of their loss of habitat or our encroachment on their habitat, they're sort of thriving in towns and cities now. Adapted their skills to, obviously, use the word predate, inverted commas, to predate on our pasties and chips and so on. But in reality, they're just going for easy meals, and I think sometimes they're really misunderstood. It's like if I see one, I'll just hide my food. But you hear lots of stories about, warning signs and shoot the herring gulls or
poisoning,
oil their eggs or whatever. So I think it's quite a tragedy, really, for such an iconic species.
Yeah. What's your opinion on herring gulls, Steph?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Stu. I think that as Stu says, it kind of just shows how intelligent they are, actually, that they're taking advantage and sort of adapting to the way that humans have sort of taken over, if you like.
Yeah, I think herring gulls in particular, and even black-backed gulls, any kind of seagull that you think of, are the ultimate opportunists. So there was originally absolutely no reason for them to be hanging out in the roads and in towns and rooting through bins and living on top of our roofs. So until we kind of overfished the oceans and created the perfect nesting sites for them on our roofs, on building tops, and kept leaving, half-eaten food all over the place, there was no reason for them to come inland. But they've basically been pushed towards us, and they're taking opportunity to kind of binge on all of our junk food that we leave strewn about the place and rubbish and stuff. So
I think as well, we sort of had a selective history of our ecosystem. So when, obviously, you mentioned we're in the English Riviera, it's like we think, oh, they're in our towns and cities, but sorry if you're not local, but there's areas such as Goodrington and Tor Abbey Gardens, which of course used to be wetlands until we reclaimed them. So actually the gulls were here much before us.
Yeah, I mean, really, if you think about it, all animal species were here before we were, until we started taking over their habitats and removing them, really.
It's a bit like us. We don't go hunting and foraging anymore because it's so much easier to go to the supermarket, and for a gull it's it's so much easier to forage on easy food, especially when there's lack of their wild food. Yeah,
I mean, if something was there right in front of you and you didn't have to spend any energy, you didn't have to forage, you didn't have to hunt, you didn't have to swim or fly, you just had to swoop and take it, like in a matter of seconds, you would surely make that decision over the other options, basically.
And I think we'll probably explore it throughout this podcast, but I've said it before on our rewilding podcast. We expect people in other parts of the world to live alongside lions or wolves, and we can't even tolerate a seagull, or a herring gull, I should say.
Yeah. Definitely. So leading on from that, kind of a short little introduction into one of our local species, but one that I know has been persecuted for many, many years is bats in general. So Steph, as a bat ecologist, what's been your kind of your interaction with people, or like, have you come across any persecution of bats while you've been working with them?
Yeah, definitely. So I'd say the biggest thing with bats is sort of, again, just how misunderstood they are, and it's amazing how little is known about bats, especially in the UK.
Yeah.
So I think it's important to say as well that, so in the UK, bats just eat insects, so we don't have giant blood-sucking bats that are going to flap around into your hair, which I think a lot of people actually, they genuinely believe that.
Yeah.
So I'd say, sort of working in like consultancy, there's quite a lot of people that are reluctant when they find out that they've got bats. So that's probably one of the biggest things about the job, is trying to sort of educate people in a way, make them understand why they're important and why they need to take the steps they do to look after bats.
I think bats, with like, even in kids' cartoons and things, people associate bats with Dracula, don't they?
Yeah.
And they're going to suck your blood, and there's something to be feared. They're a Halloween species.
Yeah.
Where actually, in reality, especially in the UK, they just keep to themselves, don't they?
Yeah, so they're actually, I think most people wouldn't even know to look for bats. So yeah, so they can live, like, especially nowadays with how sort of urban everything is, quite commonly, especially common pipistrelles, they'll live in people's roofs and you won't even notice that they're there. They're not some sort of giant pest that will encroach upon your life.
Yeah. So you've noticed since you've been living with us that we might have some bats living in our roof, which is really exciting for us because we're ecologists, conservationists, animal lovers. So that's really exciting news for us. They're not going to bother us. They're not going to come into our bedroom and like chow down on our necks when we're asleep. Like, we just go outside in the garden at night and we enjoy watching them forage.
And I think with bats as well, do you find that when you do your surveys and stuff, that there's solutions to perhaps some of the problems with bats? So obviously bats have always, in terms of planning and so on, have almost been the keystone species. Oh, you've got bats, you won't have that, you won't be able to build that or whatever. Has that changed at all in your experience, the ways to mitigate bats when people are trying to build or develop land and so on?
Yeah, there's definitely lots of things that you can do. I think one of the biggest things that I've learned from starting out in consultancy actually is that people have got this like misconception that if you've got bats it's this terrible thing and you won't be able to do any work or things like that, but actually usually you can go ahead with things. It's just more of a process of looking at how can we make this work for the wildlife that you've got and for yourself. So there are definitely ways that you can mitigate it. There's lots of things that you can do, especially now, and they're actually proven to work. So even just simple things like putting up bat boxes or just making like dark corridors, there's lots of little things that you can do to make it work.
So I think in our country we have lots of species that we sort of persecute or don't like and so on. It's sort of really pathetic because they're not really species that we can't really adapt to live along quite easily. Again, I mentioned other parts of the world, you know, we're not swimming with sharks or dealing with big eagles or, you know, dealing with ferocious predators. They're all just species that, because we don't like them or because they're an inconvenience, we just want to get rid of them. I don't know, we're going to pick another species, but they're all similar sort of things. They have an impact on our land or where we live, and these impacts are minor, and we just sort of want to get rid of these species or not.
Yeah, they're a nuisance. It's not actually like any of these species are impacting us on a grand scale. So they're not, you know, they're not causing us health issues. They're not polluting our waterways. They're not taking space. They're not. The main point is to be scared of an animal. It's going to hurt you. So if I was, say, living in Africa and I had elephants coming into my back garden on a daily basis, I might be a bit concerned. But a bat flying around in my garden when I'm in the living room watching something on telly, that's not really affecting my life, and I find it quite, I can't think of the right word, but I think you said the right word actually earlier, Stu, is pathetic. I think it can be really pathetic how we persecute species because it's inconveniencing us. rather than actually it's not causing us any damage, it's not causing any threat to life.
No, and any damage is minor, and again another inconvenient. Slugs, snails for example, we have ongoing battle with them in our garden, but we refuse to use chemicals. We just move them off the veg plots, put them in the wildlife area or whatever, where, you know, some people come out all guns blazing with the chemicals, and of course that has a mad impact.
Flamethrower.
Yeah, that has a negative impact on species which we claim to love, such as hedgehogs and so on.
Yeah.
So sometimes we've got to think of the wider picture rather than just, like Steph said with the bats, you know, they're taking the insects that annoy us. With the hedgehogs, they're taking the slugs which annoy us. So just by living harmoniously with nature, these natural ways of sort of dealing with the things that sort of annoy us and bug us.
Something that people I think forget to kind of spend some time thinking about is, if you've got bats, they're an apex predator, right? They're within their kind of section, they're at the top of the food chain. So if you've got bats in your garden or in your local woodland or whatever, you know you've got some really good biodiversity around you. You know that there's enough insects to sustain this species. It's like this is a species that I want to move on to now. Like a family of species of sharks, because everybody associates sharks with getting their legs bitten off. Or, you know, we all saw Jaws. Jaws, actually, I'm a marine biologist really by trade, like marine species are what I focus my time on, and it took me many years to get back in the water after watching Jaws. But I live in the UK and great whites don't generally hang around these parts very often. We're very lucky that we do get a diverse array of shark species. Like we get blue sharks, which is like our main one, isn't it?
Yeah.
And we get the occasional mako.
Yeah, and cat sharks are quite common as well.
Dog, you know, there's a lot of species out there.
Seagulls as well. Which
yeah, we even had a thresher shark in Devon last year and the year before.
Yeah, so we do actually have some quite big sharks in our waters, but like all sharks, they're quite harmless. They're harmless because they have some good pectoral fins, but really they are very harmless. But there's no problem with them. The bigger species, they don't interact with humans, plus they live miles offshore.
In my experience as a scuba diver, sharks are scared of bubbles. They're not going to be bothering with you. Like, it's not going to happen.
But again, it's the media portrayal of them. We do what's in the media. Badgers spread TB, bats infect us with blood diseases, you know, slugs eat everything and destroy the land, foxes are sly.
I love foxes.
You know, there's all these misconceptions throughout literature which sort of, you know, tell, and these can work positively. Owls are wise and so on. So we you know, magpies are bad luck, so oh no, I don't want a magpie in my garden, but please bring the robin. Yeah,
but robins are actually really territorial and quite angry little birds. They just look beautiful and make beautiful sounds, but 9 times out of 10, I'm not persecuting the robin right now. I love robins. Please don't misconstrue this. But robins, in comparison to other birds, are actually quite aggressive. But it's a story that we tell around a species that determines how we interact around them. But what I wanted to say about the shark is I found out this really cool kind of statistic, and it just brought it home for me personally. Number one, millions of sharks are killed every year by humans. So if anyone's supposed to be afraid of anything else, sharks should be afraid of humans. But more people are killed by vending machines than by sharks every year. So just take that into consideration. You're more likely to be in a hospital wing or in your local university hallway buying a Snickers and get hurt by that vending machine than you are to get attacked by a shark. So there's that one to mull over. But you just lightly touched on badgers just now, Stu, but there's actually been some really exciting news about, we can hear some herring gulls.
Yeah, we are recording live outside.
Yeah, we're outside in the garden. So if you hear cars and motorbikes and cracker and birds, it's because we're out in the garden. But Stu, you mentioned badgers, and badgers are one of my favourite British species. They're possibly one of our biggest mammals, aren't they, apart from deer? They are so iconic and they're so beautiful, and they really do no one any harm, apart from slugs and insects that they like to chomp on. But we've actually had some really good news recently, haven't we? We've finally had some leeway in the badger cull situation.
Yeah, so it's sort of bittersweet news, because they are ending the badger cull, but it's not going to be for another couple of years, so there will be more badgers culled. But again, it's, you know, the science, you know, it's a bovine TB. The clue's in the name. So kill all the badgers you want, it won't tackle bovine TB. And this isn't a dig at farmers, but I feel like farmers have been conned. They've been told by governments that, you know, removing this species or killing this species will help them. Now it will in some ways, because badgers do carry it, but they get infected by the cattle. So removing the badgers is just sort of removing one tiny element of it. Where the real issue is actually dealing with it in cattle. You know, it's like we catch common colds, but so do gorillas. So it's like saying, well, let's kill gorillas because they play a tiny part in passing common colds to people.
Yeah.
Which they do, but it's not really the issue.
No. Isn't it a lot of the time, because, you know, we're a farming country, especially down here in Devon, farming's a massive part of our kind of culture. But through the research that I did, because I did like wildlife rehabilitation and like wild ecology, that kind of thing, and the badger cull was something that we were asked to touch on. It turned out through doing a lot of research that actually, one, as Stu says, TB is actually spread by cows and most commonly found in cows, and it's actually passed between them. But the only real part that badgers have to play in this is they go from each field. So the cows have got the TB, right? But then the badger might eat some food out of a cattle tray where all their food is, and then go to another field and eat from that tray, and it's kind of spreading saliva or something, isn't it?
Yeah, well, in different ways it can be spread, but like bodily fluids essentially.
Yeah, but ultimately if we didn't have thousands and thousands of cows all over the country, then maybe it wouldn't be such an issue.
But again, you know, it's tackle it within the population. You know, it is a bovine disease, so that should be the focus. But you can't blame farmers when they're having their livelihoods removed and they're told it's because of this black and white animal that comes on your farm. But it's just sort of not following. It's more political than scientific. But thankfully, you know, that decision's been overruled, but it's not coming quickly enough.
It's a shame as well though, isn't it? Because we, as a country, we have spent millions of pounds on badger culls when they haven't actually done anything to help the situation. How about we talk a little bit about snakes? Are either of you guys scared of snakes? Do you have any issues with snakes?
I'm not scared of snakes. I appreciate them as a species, although I do definitely have that kind of, not fear, but I'm not very comfortable in handling them, and I think that's what it comes down to for a lot of people. I think they're so different, almost alien in a way to humans or any kind of mammal.
They're almost, I think they can be intimidating, can't they, because they're so different from us.
I think that's
like
what it is.
We can relate to a badger or a cow or a fox because we're mammals. We are them and they are us. But when it comes to a snake, it's like, oh, it doesn't have any legs. Think about snakes in a persecuted sense, I automatically think about the film Anaconda with those giant snakes just like taking people out. Like, no, even if you went into the Amazon rainforest, like, you're not going to come across one unless you go looking for it. Unless you start diving in the rivers and climbing up trees and things. Like, I've travelled all over the world, like to exotic places like Asia, and I've been in the Amazon rainforest. I saw like 2 snakes the whole time I was out there. Like, they're not going to bother you unless you start interrupting their lives.
It's funny actually, I've went to Madagascar and I've seen lots of snakes there because they just don't have that fear of people. The people really respect them, and there's some cultural differences where, you know, they stay away from snakes, the local people. But I think in Western culture, you know, snakes are right throughout history and literature. It's snakes again are evil. But I think, you know, they're relatively harmless. Stay away from them, and leave the jokes to me. Stay away from them, and you'll be okay.
Yeah.
And if you do see one, there's lots of organisations, the British Ecological Society. Frog life, obviously snakes aren't frogs, but you can record species with them as well, just to give these organisations valuable data of where you've seen them. And
please, if you see an adder or a grass snake or a smooth snake in the UK, please let us know, because I want to know where they are and I want to find one. So so let's move on to another one, which I know so many people who are terrified of these, and I was unduly scared of them too, but I feel like that was an imprint, what's the word, imprinted on me as a child from my mother. But spiders, arachnids, people are scared of 8-legged creatures, right?
I don't want to be like a stuck record, but it's that media portrayal as well. I remember growing up, there was a film called Arachnophobia.
Yeah, I watched that. It freaked me out.
I think one of the things is, you know, we don't like the unusual, and they are weird and they are alien looking, and you might walk through a web and so on. But again, you know, there's no species in the UK that can harm you. We have the false black widows, which are an invasive species, but they're no worse than unless you have allergic reactions, they're no worse than a bee sting.
Actually, it is an invasive species, but whenever I see one, I get so excited because they're just beautiful. And it's the Mediterranean wasp spider. Now, they shouldn't be here, but they are, and they've kind of fit into UK life quite well. They've not really affected anything, have they, on the ecological scale? But they're this beautiful kind of 50p piece sized spiders, and they've got these bright yellow and black stripy bodies, and they just look amazing, and they're always kind of lurking in nettle and bramble bushes.
They sort of, nature looks after itself as well. So we're sat outside now, and I don't mind the flies, but occasionally they're annoying, and the spiders take care of the flies. I love the birds, and the birds take care of the spiders. So, you know, it's, unless you're picking up these animals or, you know, encouraging them into your bedroom or whatever, you know, if they are in your bath, just leave the chain out or a little dangle of toilet roll for them to climb out. What, 10,000 times bigger than a spider, they want to avoid you.
Yeah.
If you're scared of them, think of that little soul looking back at you thinking, what's this? I get irrational fears, but they are irrational.
Yeah.
In other countries, they're dealing with spiders that can kill you, so it's a bit, you know.
You just have to lift the toilet seat in Australia and fear being stung by some crazy animal. I'm
as jumpy as the next person, but, you know, it is an irrational fear.
It is. And that, at the end of the day, that's why most of these animals are persecuted, is because we fear them. But ultimately, they are, 9 times out of 10, and should be more scared of us.
So I think we've looked at a few species, but what about just in general? Because I think we call ourselves a nation of animal lovers, but I think a lot of the time the species we come across or we persecute might be indirectly, and it might open up to Steph a little bit this in your role, but it's like it's just because of how we live our lives. So the land we build on, the extension of farming, development of transport system, roads, high-speed rail 2 is a big one at the moment. There's just hundreds if not thousands of species that are being affected, where now I very rarely see them, but what I do see is new housing developments, new roads, water pollution and so on. So I think instead of looking at different species, what do we think about just the way we're persecuting nature within the country?
It makes me really angry. I could rant about this, but I'm gonna hold it in because I could go on for hours. I like she says, I see housing estates going up all the time, and there's no one living in them. And that's what really grinds my gears, is we are sterilising beautiful parts of the country, just bulldozing them down, building houses on top of them, and there's plenty of kind of derelict houses in the UK that were built in the 60s and the 50s that have no one living in them, that could be done up and have people living in them now, which aren't being utilised. I don't know, it's money, right? It all comes down to big corporations, big companies, and doing what they've always done, making money, and that means taking out what's in their way, whether that's important to us as a universe, like as part of the world, as part of Earth. We need biodiversity to survive. If we snub out all the biodiversity, like, for one, it'd be a really depressing world to live in, and I don't think I'd want to be here. And two, I'm making myself angry talking about it because I'm just stumped for words. It just gets me so angry how we think that concrete is more important than greenery, than birds and bees and gulls and birds and hedgehogs, like whatever it is that's living in the area. Why is a concrete building more important when there's already buildings up for grabs?
Yeah. So, I mean, and it's driven again by government targets to build houses rather than rebuild nature. But Steph, you mentioned briefly in your introduction, but can you just tell us the main species that you go out and survey?
So the majority of the time it's a lot to do with bats,
Yeah.
and then also it will be reptile surveys, so as we were talking about before, so like slow worms is a big one. Obviously more rare that you would see, but you do come across snakes. I was lucky enough to see an adder last summer.
And is most of your work when people are putting planning in?
Yeah, so they need the report so they can submit for planning.
So what I'm getting at, and I'm not trying to trip you up with it, but we send ecologists out because we're looking at a few species of bats, a few species of reptiles, but then we forget about the infinite amount of invertebrates which are also living on that land, or the birds that feed upon them invertebrates, or the small mammals. So we often concentrate on the dormouse is protected,
The more charismatic
or the
species.
smooth snake's protected, or the red squirrel, don't touch that. But actually in the meantime, just our persecution of countless of British species indirectly is just sort of off the scale. Because you must, and I'm not asking you to name names or anything, but you're going on a bat survey or whatever, or perhaps more so in the daytime, you're doing a reptile survey. You must see countless birds and countless invertebrates, but they're not necessarily going on your report.
Yeah, I think that's really important to mention, especially like you were saying with invertebrates and things like that. It does definitely get forgotten and there's not as much importance attached to it. I think just as well, as you were saying, with how important it is that we're seeing all these housing estates springing up, I think it's important to mention as well, we've kind of got this idea that if we've got a nice green field that looks all pretty, that's like really great and brilliant for wildlife. But I think what's more important is actually like the natural hedgerows and the routes that wildlife can actually connect with each other. Because if you've just got sort of a bare field, it's not as sort of rich in a way as like a hedgerow with different species, or like a big group of trees that's all connected to a different landscape. I think that a lot of people kind of would even look at farmland in this country and think that that's like traditional
normal,
British wildlife, when actually that's not like 100% what it should kind of be.
Yeah. When I look at a field, I just feel sad. I genuinely feel sad because it is barren.
Yeah.
But then I look at a woodland, and although I can't see into it unless I go venturing inside, I know that inside there there's another world of wildlife going on.
Yeah, and like you said, Steph, sometimes it's not the amount of space, but rather than the quality of space.
Yeah.
So there's big chemical farms where they use lots of chemicals, and you could be you go in the managed pastures and there's nothing there. But you might go to a small organic or chemical free farm. It might be half the size or a third of the size, but you might have a wildlife friendly farmer, and it might be like a hotspot. And these hotspots we definitely need to protect, and it's good the government's looking at subsidising promotion of nature and so on, rather than keeping ground in an agricultural state. These hotspots are becoming rarer and rarer. So it's like you might build a housing estate and put a few fruit trees on it or something and say that's mitigation. Or you might move the slow worms to another site because that's mitigation. And again, apologies because it's a local example, but we just had a retail park down the road, and to mitigate bat loss they've put about 8 bat boxes up, but they're about 1.5 meters off the ground under artificial lights.
Yeah, they're token. They're not there for any.
Yeah.
They're not actually there to support bats. They're there to show the people who are less educated and don't really know how a bat box should be put up. We've put a bat box up. It won't actually have any bats in it by the end of the year, but at least we've done it, which I think is really lazy, personally. If you guys are interested, actually, Steph recently wrote a blog on our website about the importance of connectivity. So if you're interested in reading about that and how important it is to connect patches of wildlife to ensure that it survives, basically, and wildlife can connect with each other, the success of a variety of species, and there's a couple of really cool examples in there, definitely go onto our website and give that blog a read. But I think for one final species I want to touch on before we kind of log off is foxes in the UK. So no doubt the majority of our listeners are from the UK and know about the notorious fox hunt that probably goes on more than once a year on Boxing Day.
Yeah, it's usually autumn through to springtime-ish.
Yeah. So this was made illegal how many years ago? Over 10 years ago?
Yeah, well over 10 years
well
ago.
over 10 years ago, maybe 14 years ago.
I want to say 2004, but don't quote me on that.
Yeah, I think you're right. That rings a bell. So it's been banned for a lot of years, and we do call ourselves a nation of nature lovers here. And yet, for some reason, it still goes ahead. Countless foxes are hunted by men on horses with poor dogs that probably don't even want to be there.
Yeah. Men and women on the horses.
Men and women, and torn apart. It's not ethical and it's not quick. It's long, tedious, painful, and really upsetting, especially for those of us who care deeply for wildlife.
Well,
and one of the things that actually really irritates me most is how they trespass as well. They trespass onto so we're very lucky. We've got the moors, we've got Dartmoor on our back garden, and I have a friend who lives on Dartmoor, and she told me that the fox hunt goes through her back garden without a care in the world for her family, her dogs. They just plough through without a care in the world, chasing after some poor unsuspected fox, and it's really upsetting and totally unjust and totally uncalled for.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's just no place for it in modern society. There's a few things. So obviously we say, you know, the Conservative Party often get a lot of the blame for it because people like Theresa May and David Cameron and so on have said they'll have a free vote on bringing it back. But actually there's many Tory MPs who are against fox hunting, and I don't think they would ever vote for it, and they're quite open and vocal about that. So, you know, praise is deserved to them MPs. But also it's over 80% of the British public doesn't want to see fox hunting, and I just think it's a very barbaric way of dealing with a problem. So I'm not condoning this, but if foxes are pests, then shoot them. It's simple, it's quick to do.
I have to interrupt you there because I know you know this, and I just have to say it just before we... But this is something that's been known for many, many years, since I was in school, and I'm 30 now. So I was in school a long time ago, like secondary school, doing my GCSEs. Foxes actually, when their numbers get too great within a pack, they will kill each other off to keep their numbers at a maintainable level.
Yeah, and they stop breeding and so on.
Yeah, they do what they need to do to maintain a healthy population. So for one, that makes fox hunting, like, it's a moot point if any fox hunter says that, oh yeah, we need to keep the population down. That is BS.
But I think as well, like, just before I lose my thread, sometimes the population might be low and people still think they're a pest. So if there are a pest species, there's a lot more efficient ways of dealing with them. Now again, I don't agree with that. And then we have species as the fox, which have evolved to live in urban areas. So the argument's nulled, you know, you can't go fox hunting around Bristol in the city centre and so on. So how are you going to control them if they need controlling? The other one was when the fox, the hunting ban come into place. Talk about economic loss. Now, as far as I remember, I don't see so many stables closing. I don't see hundreds of hounds being put down. You know, there are ways and means around it, such as drag hunting and trail hunting. Again, these are abused by fox hunters where they use them as an excuse. And there's a lot of hunt sabs around the country which are exposed hunts for this. So I think in terms of them being a pest is not really an argument. In terms of the economic loss is not really an argument. The other ones, oh, we exercise our horses, where you can exercise your horse just by running and jumping through fences and so on. There's this other reason, and this is probably where it lies, and it's the reason of it's a cultural reason. It's a countryside pursuit, and I think that's probably the most difficult argument to overturn, because people are always going to do what they think's right. But just imagine where society would be if we took cultural pursuits. You know, I'm not comparing it with slavery, but would we still have slaves because it was a culture? Should the Japanese kill whales because it's a culture? Should we wear fur coats because it was a culture? So I think that argument's, you know, we're in 2020. I don't really see that argument.
Yeah.
The only argument I see is people just want to kill foxes with hounds, and you know, people want to rob houses, people want to murder, people want to, you know, do all sorts of things. But the law's the law, and I'm not blaming the police because they're underfunded, but people are breaking the law, and I think as a society we need to sort of realise it is the law. You know, just because it's wildlife doesn't mean it's less of a priority.
This is a big problem actually, isn't it? If you I've mentioned this a few times on our podcast, is how I study harbour porpoises, and I spend a lot of time standing on headlands and watching them feed and forage. And I watch people break the law on a daily basis by pursuing cetaceans. So it's against the law in the UK to disturb cetaceans, and that means approaching them without just cause, basically. Unless you're going to rescue one and you're qualified to do so, there's absolutely no reason why you should be chasing after them in a jet ski. That's breaking the law. If I call the police about that, they don't know what to do. They tell me to call the harbour master, and then the harbour master will tell me to call the police. So it's a big,
and sometimes,
big circle.
Sometimes you'll get this as a civil matter when it's not. It's a criminal matter.
You are breaking the law. It is legislation, and you're breaking it.
I fully appreciate that. Like, I used to keep chickens, and I would have been heartbroken if a fox broke into my chickens. But it never happened, not because I've not got foxes in my area, but because I had good fences and locked them away at night and so on. Yeah, and I think the other thing is, and some chicken keepers do this, if a fox gets into your chickens and kills 5 chickens, then let the fox take them chickens, because they are cash feeders, so they will store the carcasses, where if you chase them off when you're left with 5 dead chickens, all that fox is going to do is find 5 more chickens or a rabbit or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, it is heartbreaking.
And I just... After people that fox hunt were probably outraged when Cecil Lion got killed.
Yeah.
Because it's a lion, and God, it's a beautiful, majestic animal.
It's far removed, isn't it? These species that are far removed from us.
It's that perception
have a bigger
again.
Place in our
it's
hearts.
that perception again that we've always done it. It's vermin. We are above the ecosystem, and I think as things have happened this year, especially, and what we're going through now, and with climate change as well, I think. Big reality check, I should say, to say that we're actually part of this ecosystem, and actually we rely upon it.
So I think I'm going to leave it there. We've had a really good little natter, and thank you so much for joining us, Steph. So just a little reminder that we're all in this together at the moment, and we're going through tough times, but please stay at home. Unless you absolutely have to leave the house, please stay at home. And a massive thank you to all of the key workers, especially the NHS, who are supporting us in these horrible and really uncertain times. But in the meantime, please enjoy the podcast. Please make sure to leave us a comment and get involved, join the conversation. And you can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and we've also got our website, www.conservationchatuk.com. And we'll speak to you in the next podcast.